Welcome to another edition of the McEnulty Method, where we help young adults live better financial lives. I'm joined tonight by financial expert Frank McEnulty. Frank, how you doing?
Great, Colin. And you?
I'm good. And tonight we're going to be continuing our mini-series talking about all things personal finance, and a really popular topic tonight, we were talking credit and debt management. So everything credit scores, credit cards, paying back loans, a lot of the things young adults have to deal with. So, Frank, let's dive right into it. Segment one, talking about credit score. What is a credit score? Why is it important? And then, of course, the logical next question: what is a good credit score?
Well, credit score is what lenders use to determine how creditworthy you are, whether they want to lend you money or not. So, if you have a decent credit score, you can borrow more money, usually at lower rates. So that's a credit score. And I believe the range is from 350 to 850. 350 being really bad, 850 being as high as it goes. I've said before, why it only goes to 850, why it's not 0 to 1,000, I have no idea. That would a normal person would think 0 to 1,000, 0 to 100, something. But that's what it is. A good score out of that 850 is basically anything from 750 up. There's not much differentiation with lenders between 750 and 850.
All right, so 750 and up, you're getting their best rate.
Usually.
And how do we get to that 750? How do you build your credit score, and is it only through credit cards?
Well, you build a credit score by borrowing money. And yes, most people start out with a credit card. They get a credit card, they use it a little bit, they pay it off every month, they show that they're responsible with them, and their credit score starts to go up. It doesn't have to be through just credit cards, though. It can be through things like a car loan. Now, once again, it's where you get the car loan. I'm not sure Bob's Used Cars making you a high interest rate loan is going to they're going to be reporting to the credit agency. If you buy a used car from the local Toyota dealership, however, and borrow money through them, that's probably going to be reported every month. So that's the key. You want it reported to make sure that it starts to build your credit. But really the easiest way is a credit card. And as we talked in one of our last episodes, most people go to your credit union, open an account, get a credit card from them. You use that sparingly. You don't have to use it much. You shouldn't use it much. One of the biggest fallacies out there is that if you have a $500 limit on your card, you want to use $500 a month and then pay it off. Which, once again, a normal person would think, hey, that's really good. I'm using all my credit and I'm paying it off every month, so I'm good. Well, unfortunately, the credit agencies look at the percentage of your available credit you use. So if you have a $500 card and you're even running up $400 on it a month, well, they're saying, well, you're using 80% of your credit. That's dangerous. So you really want to keep your credit usage down below 30% of your available balance every month. That doesn't mean once in a while you have a car breakdown, you got to use the card, get it up there. That's not going to hurt you. But if you keep it up there all the time, it's going to hurt.
Yeah, and credit card is obviously one of the most common ways people build their credit score, especially young adults. So why don't we talk a little bit about, and you already started to, using that card responsibly. So you mentioned keeping it under the 30%. What are some other common, traps would be the word, that first time, let's say people getting their first credit card fall into?
Well, not paying it off every month is not necessarily a bad thing as long as you pay at least the minimum, because that's keeping your credit going. But then you can't use the card as much later, and you are now paying the bank interest, What you don't want to get in the trap is that you use it too much and you can't pay it each month, and you dig a bigger and bigger hole. Right. That's one of the bigger things. And missing a credit card payment by one day. And you say, well, I'll pay it. It's due on the 20th. I'll pay it on the 19th. Well, the bank's not going to get it till the 22nd or 23rd or whatever. They're going to say you're late. So I paid it on time. According to my business law class, when I stuck it in the mail, that's constructive receipt with the credit card company. Yes, and you'll have to call them every month and tell them that and everything else. Don't do it. When you get your statement and it says, this is how much is due, just pay it that day. Don't say, I'll do it later, because you shouldn't have used your credit card for things that you couldn't afford anyways.
You know, I did that once with my first card. I said, I'll pay it the day before. Day before was a Sunday, so bank's not open on a Sunday. So, Frank, speaking of using a credit card responsibly and talking about the credit limits on a credit card, I guess two questions. One, is it possible to go over the limit? And if so, what happens when you do go over the limit?
Well, if it's a new credit card, they will cut you off pretty close to the limit. They're not going to let you go over because you're new. If you've had it for a while, they'll let you go over, but then you're going to have to pay back they're going to want it back a lot quicker because they're getting nervous now. The computers are saying, uh-oh, what's going on here?
Too risky.
They're trying to go over their limit. They get excited. Like I said, it's all about showing responsibility. And your credit score is very important now, because it's not only when you go to buy something. If you go to rent an apartment, they're going to run your credit score. If you're going to get a job, they're going to run your credit score, because it tells them if you're a responsible human being. So it really counts a lot more than it ever used to. Everybody's going to check it.
That's good to know.
And so there's several factors with your FICO score, credit score. Your payment history. Are you paying everything on time? Are you keeping what you owe down that minimum, under 30% of what's available? How long have you had the card? How much new credit are you trying to get?
Right. That could also be a sign of issues.
And credit mix. What have you borrowed? Is it all credit cards? Is it cars? Is it homes? Right. And they've got some magic formulas to do it. But the bottom line is, if you're responsible and just pay things off, you'll be fine.
That's good to know. Well, let's switch to another form of debt that most young adults are dealing with, student loans. So, Frank, can you talk a little bit about what the different type of student loans are and then the key differences? So usually I see the two different types, one that accumulates interest while you're actually in school, and then one that doesn't start to accumulate interest until you're out of school.
Well, obviously you want to try to get the ones that don't accumulate interest till you're out of school. And those are more likely the government student loans. Right. Versus the private student loans. You borrow their money, they're going to start adding interest to it from day one. Now, you don't have to pay it, but it just keeps getting bigger. I mean, I've had several of these conversations recently with students because we're getting to the end of the school year. I've got a bunch of people graduating, and they're like, oh, what do I do with this debt? How do I get rid of it? I said, you just got to start paying it off, because the days of the government saying, don't worry about that much, at least are gone for now. They're going to come after people. They want to be paid. So it's like a credit card. You got to at least make your minimum monthly payment. If you can make more, pay it off. Having a bunch of debt hanging over your head's a horrible feeling. It's just, it's like somebody's tapping you on the shoulder all the time going, hey. Do
you have any tips for, you talk about repaying it, I think, your general idea, just getting on top of it, but how about getting ahead of it? Tips for repaying it while you're actually in school, especially for the ones that haven't even started to accumulate interest yet.
Well, while you're in school, sometimes it's hard. You're working to go to school, and it might be tough to make more money. So I'm not. Maybe the key is not borrow as much as they'll give you.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem. They'll give you a lot of money.
Sure.
And maybe if you just go, if I worked an extra day a week, worked on a Saturday, I wouldn't have to borrow as much money. And the same goes for paying the loan off. I know you're going to get out of school, you're going to go to work full time, and it's going to be, I'm at work 40 hours a week, 45 hours a week. I'm so tired. You're not. Okay? What bothers you more? The fact that you might be a little tired, or the fact you've got this huge debt thing tapping you on the shoulder every day going, hey. If you, and I've used this example before because it was a neighbor girl across the street, same age as my daughters. She had a decent job with a company, but she decided that she wanted to get enough money to put a down payment on a condo. So what'd she do? She went out and got a job in the evenings, delivering pizza. But it was extra money every day, extra money every day, extra money on the weekends. And that extra money adds up really quick. And so the same thing here. Just work more and pay the debt off. I mean, I'm not asking anybody to work 120 hours a week. That's sort of crazy. There's only 168 hours in a week. And so 120 is crazy.
It's only for the Doge people.
Yeah, the Doge people aren't working 120 hours a week either. They may be sitting around a lot jabbering, but that's almost impossible to keep that going for a long time. But 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, 60 hours a week is not that much. I know work week's 40, but if you wanted to pay off the debt, if you wanted to earn money to get that condo, maybe you need a new car, then work a little extra. Make it so that the car, I think you'd be happier with a car that's you don't have to pay $600 a month for, that you work to get, than you have a car where it's like, oh my God, I got to make this payment every month, and it's really cutting me short. Then the car is a burden. So yeah, just work. You're young. You can do it.
Empathy, Frank. Empathy. Can you talk a little bit about loan forgiveness? You talked about repayment options. Can you talk a little bit about what options exist for at least forgiving part or in some cases all of the loans?
Well, a lot of that's changed in the last
few months,
100 days. But it's, if you just want to get rid of it, there are ways. You could join the military. They'll get rid of I believe they'll get rid of some of your student loans after the fact, after you've been in a while. I know that's not what people went to college for, to go to the military, but they have some pretty good jobs in there now, especially if you come out with a college degree, you go to officer candidate school, you get through, you're an officer. When you do that, I'll go down this whole path just for a minute. So you graduate, you're 22, you go into the Army as an officer. Yeah, the first 6 months are a real pain. First 6 months of any job's a real pain. Yeah, there's a little more pain in this one, but okay. But you know something? In 20 more years, when you're 42, you could retire from the Army or the Marines or the Navy or any of them, possibly you'd hopefully be at least if you're in the Army, a major by then, not a light colonel. You retire, you start getting paid that retirement when you're 42. Now you have the option to take what you learned there and go somewhere else. And I've sort of chased a squirrel here off into the woods. So the other ways to have the student debt paid off, I know there are other government programs where if you become a teacher and you work in a disadvantaged school district somewhere, they'll start to forgive your debt. You used to be able to get into the Peace Corps and do that. I assume that's still there. You never hear the Peace Corps anymore, though. I think it's more of an East Coast thing than a West Coast thing. I don't know why, but you just don't hear about it. So, yeah, one way or another, you're going to work to pay this off because, quite honestly, you took the money.
No, it's just good discussion. And to sort of wrap up the general discussion on debt repayment, Frank, something we had looked at was Avalanche versus Snowball debt repayment. These words that they give to repayment strategies. One being that you pay off whatever your largest debt is first, because that's the one that's hurting the most, and you work down from there. The other strategy being just getting started. Pay off whatever's the easiest, because the hardest thing is getting started. Do you generally think there's a better way to do it, or a situation that?
Well, I would think you'd want to pay off the one with the highest interest rate first. Mm-hmm. That's the one you got to get rid of. Yeah. If you got a 22% credit card loan out there, mm-hmm. get that paid off, and the student loans 7%. Well, make your minimum payments on the student loan and get that card gone.
Well, hold that thought then, because I'll just jump right into a real question that we got from a young adult. This person, subject line, are they over prioritizing paying off their student loans? So here you go, Frank. They're 23 years old with $4,500 worth of student loan debt, 2.5% interest. However, they recently got a $22,000 car loan at basically 5% interest. And they mentioned that they've been paying about $500 a month towards their student loans, and at that pace should be done by the end of the year. So that's a good thing. However, as they found out, since buying their car, they haven't been able to save as much as they'd like. So their question is, should they be less aggressive paying off their student loans, which again is a much lower amount at a lower interest, or, and this is kind of following up that question, should they just finish paying off the student loan debt, be done with it, and then move on towards the car loan?
Well, this one's a little tricky because the interest rates, while different, 2.5 to basically 5, they're not that big a difference.
No, but the principle is.
The principle is, but once again, from a purely financial standpoint, the thing would be pay the minimum payments on your student loan and get that car paid off because you're paying more interest. Okay. The numbers aren't always what you have to base your life on. Maybe just the psychological pain of having two loans is worse. You're just like, I got to pay two loans. I got two loans, because no one sits there and goes, well, I'm paying 2.5, I'm paying 4.9%. So in this case, I'd almost suggest just paying off. They're going to have the student loan paid off this year. Get rid of it. Just keep making your car payments. Get rid of the student loan. So it's not, you don't have two things tapping you on your shoulder. You just have the one.
Imagine if you had three. You only got two shoulders.
Yeah, I mean, and people do that. Of course, the best advice would have been not get a $22,000 car when you
can't go back in time, Frank.
No, you can't.
Mistakes are mistakes.
We've all done it. It just happens. A friend of mine showed up in my driveway last week with a brand new Corvette convertible. It is a gorgeous car. It is one of the best looking cars I have ever seen. It is so pretty. And so we went to volleyball, of course, and we had lunch, then he went home. You know what I did? I went and saw how much one of those costs. Well, once I saw how much one of those costs, I go, it ain't that pretty.
There you go. Yeah, be friends with the guy with the cool card. Don't own the cool card.
I mean, I could afford it, but I don't want to. It's just.
All right, Frank. Well, we got to get out of here, but thank you for taking the time to go through all of this with us. Credit, debt management. Previous episodes, we've gone over the basics and setting up an account. So really excited for next week, jumping into everybody's favorite, investing. So start to get into the basics of investing, the value of time and compound interest and all different types of investments, investment accounts. So for all those listening out there, definitely want to stay tuned for that. Frank, thanks again for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Colin.
And we'll see you next time on another edition of The McEnulty Method.